always we are filled with a strange sense of the mystery and the miracle of life. In our private lives, we are mindful of so many little blessings, some so intimate, so closely binding that to us they do not seem to be blessings at all. The ability to get tired and to be renewed by rest and relaxation, the taste of food, the peculiar quality that only cool water has when we drink it, the tender reminders of the love of mother and father, of sister, of brother, of husband, of wife, of child. The coming of daybreak, the experience of daylight, the intimate quality of twilight, and then the mystery of darkness, and all the dimensions of meaning that each of us finds in this cycle of movement that wraps us and sustains us and holds us with such security. The heritage which is ours, ideas, notions, values, all of the monitors of our behavior and our living that nudge us on the elbow when there is a fleeting moment that would lead us to disaster and to those things that would make our lives sad and broken. For our land, with its resources so abundant, fresh vegetables to eat, climate that does not threaten too disastrously the little windbreaks that we build against the weather. Beyond all of this, a sense of being upheld and cradled by a feeling of strength that is not of our making, something that gives to our lives a quality of integrity and meaning which we did not generate. the whisper that comes in the heart telling us to lift up our heads and be of good courage. All of the benedictions of our lives, we remember them, our Father, as we sit here or wherever we are, remembering and waiting for the movement of thy Spirit in our hearts and our minds. We offer to thee our thanks because we want to love thee. We want to make of our lives a sacrament. In thy hands. Teach us how, our Father. Lest our spirits die and all the virtue disappear from our living. And we vanish as shadows in the dark. We do want to love thee. Teach us how, Father. Teach us how. I'm continuing our thinking together about the moment of crisis, and this morning the moment of crisis in the life of Abraham Lincoln. And I shall depart from what is customary, I think. I want to do quite a bit of reading this morning. First, I shall read from Benet's John Brown's Body. This will establish the setting for what is on my mind, and then I will try to say all that I have to say in 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16 minutes. And then the last part will be from the lips, from the pen of Lincoln himself. So I hope you will just be. While I live and breathe, I mean to save the Union if I can, and by whatever means my hands can find under the Constitution. I put the Union first and last before the slave. If freeing slaves will bring the Union back, then I will free them. If by freeing some and leaving some enslaved I help my cause, I will do that. But should such freedom mean the wreckage of the Union that I serve, I would not free a slave. If I may insert something here, I remember the first time I read this, not this from this book, but the first time I read the words of Lincoln saying this, it exploded the myth that had been a part of that which nurtured me as a boy. And for 10 weary years of my life, I could find no place in my mind and in my thought for this man, because having been conditioned so early with such terrifying stories about what slavery was like as it came from the lips of the people who had come through the experience, I could not understand how on earth Lincoln could say such a thing. Changes came. And it may be that in the 12 minutes it will be clear, and maybe not. O will of God, I'm a patient man, and I can wait like an old gun flint buried in the ground while the slow years pile up like moldering leaves above me underneath the rake of time, and turn in time to the dark, fruitful mold that smells of Sangamon apples, till at last there's no sleep left there, and the steel event descends to strike the live coal out of me and light the powder that was always there. This is my only virtue, as I see it, ability to wait and hold my own and keep my own resolves once they are made, in spite of what the smarter people say. I can't be smart the way that they're smart. I've known that since I was an ugly child. It teaches you to be an ugly child. It teaches you to lose a thing you love. It sticks your roots down into Sangamon ground and makes you grow when you don't want to grow, and makes you tough enough to wait life out. Wait like the fields under the rain and snow. And then, I've never found a church that I could join. Although I've prayed in churches in my time and listened to all sorts of ministers, well, they were good men, most of them. And yet the thing behind the words, it's hard to find. I used to think it wasn't there at all, couldn't be there. I cannot say that now. And now I pray to you and to you alone. Teach me to know your will. Teach me to read your difficult purpose here, which must be plain, if I had eyes to see. Make me just. There was a man I knew near Pigeon Creek who kept a kennel full of hunting dogs, young dogs and old smart hounds and silly hounds. He'd sell the young ones every now and then, smart as they were and slick as they could run. But the one dog he'd never sell or lend was an old half-dead, foolish-looking hound. You wouldn't think had sense to scratch a flea unless the flea were old and sickly too. Most days he used to lie beside the stove or sleeping in a piece of sun outside. Folks used to plague the man about that dog, and he'd agree to everything they said. No, he ain't much on looks or much on speed. A young dog can outrun him any time, outlook him and out-eat him and out-leap him. But mister, that dog is hell on a cold scent. And once he gets his teeth in what he's after, he don't let go until he knows he's dead. I am that old, deaf hunting dog, O Lord, and the world's kennel holds 10,000 hounds, smarter and faster and with finer coats, to hunt your hidden purpose up the wind and bell upon the trace you leave behind. But even when they fail and lose the scent, I will keep on, because I must keep on, until you utterly reveal yourself and sink my teeth in justice, soon or late. There is no more to ask of earth or fire, and water only runs between my hands. But in the air I'll look, in the blue air, the old dog muzzled down to the cold scent day after day, until the tired years crackle beneath his feet like broken sticks, and the last barren bush consumes with peace. I should have tried the course with younger legs. This hunting ground is stiff enough to pull the metal heart out of a dog of steel. I should have started back at Pigeon Creek from scratch, not 40 years behind the mark. But you can't change yourself. And if you could, you might fetch the wrong jackknife in the swamp. It's up to you to whittle what you can with what you've got. And what I am for what it's worth, hippo and legs and all. I can't complain. I'm ready to admit you could have made a better looking dog from the same raw material, no doubt, but since you didn't, this'll have to do. Therefore, I utterly lift up my hands to you, and here and now beseech your aid. I have held back when others tugged me on. I've gone on when others pulled me back, striving to read your will, striving to find the justice and expedience of this case, hunting an arrow down the chilly airs until my eyes are blind with the great wind and my heart sick with running after peace. And now I stand and tremble on the last edge of the last blue cliff, a hound beat out, tail down and belly flattened to the ground. My lungs are breathless and my legs are whipped. Everything in me is whipped except my will. I can't go on. And yet I must go on. I will say this. 2 months ago, I read my proclamation setting those men free, to Seward and the rest. I told them then I was not calling on them for advice, but to hear something that I meant to do. We talked about it. Most of them approved the thing, if not the time. Then Seward said something that I hadn't thought of. I approve the proclamation, but if issued now with our defeats in everybody's mouth, it may be viewed as a last shriek for help from an exhausted, beaten government. Put it aside until a victory comes, then issue it with victory. He was right. I put the thing aside, and ever since there's been nothing for us but defeat. Still no news. Oh, if I had eyes that could look into Maryland. If I could move that battle with my hands. No, it won't work. I'm not a general. All I can do is trust the men who are. I'm not a general, no, but I promise this. Here at the end of every ounce of strength that I can muster, here in the dark pit of ignorance that is not quite despair, and doubt that does but must not break the mind, the pit I have inhabited so long at various times and seasons that my soul has taken color in its very grains from the blind darkness, from the lonely cave that never hears a footstep but my own, nor ever will, while I'm a man alive to keep my prison locked from visitors. What if I heard another footstep there? What if someday there is no one but God? No one but God who could descend that stair and ring his heavy footfalls on the stone. And if God came, what would we say to him? That prison is ourselves that we have built, and being so, its loneliness is just, and being so, its loneliness endures. But if another came, what would we say? What can the blind say, given back their eyes? No, it must be as it has always been. But one thing I know, God is not a jailer. And I make a promise now to you and to myself, if this last battle is a victory and they can drive the rebel army back from Maryland, back over the Potomac, my proclamation shall go out at last to set those other prisoners and slaves from this next year, then and forever free. So much for my will. God, show me what is yours. Ah, that must be news. Those footsteps in the hall. Good news, else they wouldn't come so fast. What is it, Hay? Yes, I'm glad of that. I'm very glad. There's no mistake this time. We have the best of them. They're in retreat. Ah, this is a great day, Stanton. If McClellan can only follow up the victory now. Lord, I will keep my promise and go on your will in much still being dark to me, but in this one thing as I see it plain. And yet, if Lee slips from our hands again, as he well may, from all those last reports, and the war still goes on, and still no end, even after this Antietam, not for years, I cannot read it, but I will go on. Old dog, settle to the scent, and with fresh breath now from this breathing space, Almighty God. At best, we never seem to know you wholly, but there is something left, a strange last courage. We can fail and fail and fail, but deep against the failure, something wars. Something goes forward. Something lights a match. Something gets up from Sangamon County ground, armed with a bitten and a blunted axe, and after 20,000 wasted strokes, brings the tall hemlock crashing to the ground. Crisis is the experience in which a man passes when he senses that he is being pulled in contrary directions by two forces moving in opposite directions, and he must go one way or the other. To make the decision sometimes means a repudiation of one's past, as in the case of the Apostle Paul. To make the decision sometimes means the confirmation of one's past, as in the case of Jesus of Nazareth. With Abraham Lincoln, the crisis came when he had retired from politics against his will somewhat, after having served one term in the House of Representatives, and put all of his weight on the wrong side, and was repudiated by his constituency. And he goes back, having shopped around in Washington, to see if he could land something to keep from going back home, which is still, which does happen. But he couldn't land anything. He couldn't even have anything to say about the patronage. So he went back home and began the practice of law all over again. He was not a brilliant man. He was a plotter, a man with a wealth of stories and humor, a man who was deeply ingrained in the insight of the founding fathers, because it is through them he felt that this country had been projected, and one of the most important and exciting things about it was the nature of the freedom which it guaranteed, that there was no ceiling for the individual that was established by the state. This is important. He was attending to his business during this lull after his experience in politics, practicing, reading all the things he could get his hands on. The familiar picture that is given, as you recognize, is having his horse set in the road that would go to the next town. He didn't have to guide the horse. He could simply settle back in the buggy and read. And when this horse met another horse, he recognized him as his cousin, and they greeted each other, and they went on. Lincoln was undisturbed. Now, this was making of him a very good lawyer, and he was making some money. As a matter of fact, one of his peak years, he made as much as $2,500, and many years ago, that was a lot of money, because it's a lot of money today. Now, he lived with the other lawyers. You know, they made the circuits, you see, and you have hotels in those days, so you lived in boarding houses. Sometimes as many as 7 or 8 lawyers would be sleeping in one room, 2 in a bed during court. All the time, Lincoln was deepening his sense of history as affecting American life. And then something happened. Douglas, who was in the Senate and was the chairman, who was the Congress and was the chairman of the Territorial Committee, reported out of his committee a bill which opened up Kansas and Nebraska, finally, as territories. And into these territories, it would be possible for slavery to go. Now, if this is successful, then it would mean that interdiction, which was a part of the Missouri Compromise, would be waved aside, and slavery would be given a new lease on life, for it could invade territory that was being opened up, and then at last it could go anywhere, Lincoln felt. And this, in his judgment, was a violation of the mind and the spirit and the will of the founding fathers, for they took into account, says Lincoln and the other men about his time who felt the same way, they took into account the fact of slavery, but they thought that if they could confine slavery to a certain area and freeze it there, then if it had no way by which it could expand, it would die on the vine. Whether this is right or wrong is beside the point, but this is the way they felt. And therefore, when Lincoln saw that this whole new territory would be opened up and that slavery would move out now and begin to grow and develop and finally become universal in America, he said, I was shaken to my roots as I have never been shaken before. And I knew that I would have to put all of the weight of my mind and my resources and my experience on the side of the meaning of freedom under the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and I could not any longer afford the luxury of merely withdrawing from the fray and being a practitioner of the law at the bar. And so we find him now snatched up by what seemed to him rightly or wrongly, to have been the movement of the hand of destiny interpreted by this man who was not a churchman as the act of the will of God on his life that sent him out now to engage in the fray, to do everything that he could to save the Union, which to him meant to save freedom not only for America, but for all the world. And when he stepped out into these debates with Douglas, with this basic commitment becoming now the hard core of his purpose, and feeling that in so doing he was no longer Abe Lincoln, but he was the living instrument in the hands of him who controlled the destiny of America and who controlled the freedom of all peoples in the world. When this happened, a dam broke in his spirit and in his life. And what was dead prose, a kind of homespun, wooden prose, becomes now shot through with the kind of glory that makes his words carry the majesty of prayer. Listen to the words. "47 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our powers to add or detract. The world will little note or long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And then at a later time, on the occasion of his second inaugural, fellow countrymen, at this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at first. Then a statement somewhat in detail of a course to be pursued seemed fitting and proper. Now, at the expiration of 4 years, during which public declarations have been constantly called forth on every point and phase of the great contest which still absorbs the attention and engrosses the energies of the nation, little that is new could be presented. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the public as to myself. And it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all. With high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to it is ventured. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, to perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude of the duration which it has already maintained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope. Fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and every drop of blood drawn from the lash shall be paid by another drawn from the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Our hearts are deeply stirred, and our minds are refreshed. by this witness of the movement of thy Spirit in the heart of a man, our Father. Grant that in the way that we take, we shall do no violence to that Spirit, that in the things that we control and in the things that control us, we may be able to bring joy to thy heart and praise to thy name, that the time may never come when thou shalt be ashamed of us. O living Father of thy living children,